31 of the finest doctors in the country stood inside a private ICU suite at Lakeside Memorial Hospital in Chicago, and not one of them could explain why Monica Harrington was dying. Every test contradicted the last, every treatment failed. The CEO of a billion-dollar empire was slipping away under fluorescent lights, while the most decorated physicians in the state argued in circles. Then I, a black man in a wrinkled flannel shirt, a single father who had wandered in from the pediatric ward, stepped forward and said 7 words that silenced the room. "I know what's killing her." They laughed. They should not have. Before we dive in, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss how this story ends. Trust me, you're going to want to stay for this one. The children's ward at Lakeside Memorial smelled like antiseptic and apple juice. I sat on the edge of a narrow cot, my daughter Lily's small hand curled around my index finger. Lily was 7. She had her mother's wide brown eyes and my stubborn jaw, and right now both features were softened by sleep. The sickle cell crisis had hit, the worst one yet. Her hemoglobin had dropped to 5.8. I had watched the nurses cycle in and out with transfusion bags while my daughter shivered under a thin hospital blanket. I had not left her side except to use the bathroom. My phone had missed calls from my supervisor at the building where I worked maintenance. I would deal with that later, or I would not. There was no version of the world where I left that room, while my daughter still had an IV in her arm. I reached over and adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. On the nightstand sat a worn copy of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, its spine cracked from years of bedtime readings. Lily always asked for the same chapter, the one where Dorothy realizes she had the power to go home all along. I never told her why that chapter made my throat tighten. Vanessa would have known what to say right now. Vanessa always knew what to say. But Vanessa had been dead for years, killed by a tumor no one had thought to look for. 2 floors above the pediatric ward in the VIP wing that most hospital staff had never set foot in, controlled chaos was unfolding. Monica Harrington, 58-year-old chief executive officer of Harrington Global Industries, ranked 14th on Forbes' list of the most powerful women in business, had been airlifted in earlier after collapsing during a board meeting. The initial reports were alarming but vague. Blood pressure spiking to 240 over 130, then crashing to 80 over 50 within minutes. Heart rate swinging wildly between 40 and 160, profuse sweating, a headache so severe she had vomited before losing consciousness. The VIP suite looked less like a hospital room and more like a luxury hotel that happened to have medical equipment, marble floors, a sitting area with leather chairs, a window overlooking downtown. None of it mattered now. Monica lay in the center of it all, intubated, sedated, her skin the color of old paper, monitors screaming numbers that made no sense to anyone watching. Her husband, Stephen Harrington, stood by the window with his arms crossed and his tie loosened. He had not spoken in hours. Beside him, Monica's chief of staff, a sharp woman named Karen Dawson, was on her 4th phone call with the company's board of directors. The stock had already dipped 3% on rumors that something was wrong with the CEO. If Monica died, the number would be closer to 15. The hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Henry Caldwell, had made the calls personally. Within hours, 31 specialists had assembled: cardiologists, neurologists, endocrinologists, infectious disease experts, nephrologists, toxicologists. They came from 3 different states. 2 of them had literally stepped off planes. The hospital was billing Monica's insurance at a rate that would make most families lose their homes. And it was worth every cent if these minds could figure out what was killing her. They could not. Dr. Alan Becker, head of cardiology, was convinced it was a cardiac event. Hypertensive emergency complicated by an underlying arrhythmia. He ordered intravenous labetalol. Monica's blood pressure stabilized for a short time, then crashed again, worse than before. Dr. Rachel Bennett from neurology argued for a hemorrhagic stroke, possibly masked by the cardiac symptoms. A CT scan showed nothing, an MRI showed nothing. She ordered a lumbar puncture anyway, and the results came back clean. Dr. Kevin Marshall, the infectious disease specialist, raised the possibility of sepsis from an unknown source. Blood cultures were drawn. Broad-spectrum antibiotics were started. Monica did not improve. The specialist had fractured into camps. 3 separate whiteboards had been rolled into the adjacent conference room, each covered in competing theories and conflicting timelines. Voices were rising. Egos were colliding. Dr. Victor Lang, the senior attending and the hospital's most published physician, had taken unofficial command of the room, dismissing theories with the confidence of a man who had never been wrong in his life. He was leaning toward a rare autoimmune vasculitis, but could not explain why Monica's catecholamine markers were behaving erratically. No one could explain anything. That was the problem. Meanwhile, Monica's kidneys were beginning to fail. I first heard about the VIP patient from a nurse named Betty. She had come to check Lily's IV line and mentioned casually that the whole hospital was in an uproar. Some rich woman upstairs was dying, and nobody could figure out why. I had nodded politely and said nothing. When Lily woke up crying, the pain was back, a deep grinding ache in her bones that the medication could only dull, never erase. I held her, rocking gently, humming a song Vanessa used to sing until the crying softened into whimpers, and the whimpers faded into sleep. Then I eased her back onto the pillow and stepped into the hallway to find a nurse. The pediatric ward was quiet, the nurse's station was empty. I walked further down the corridor, turned left, then right, following the signs toward what I thought was another nurse's station. I did not realize I had crossed into the VIP wing until the carpet changed from linoleum to something soft. The conference room door was open, not wide, just enough for sound to escape. I heard the voices before I saw the faces, a dozen men and women in white coats talking over each other, throwing around terms that most people would not recognize. I recognized every single one. Blood pressure paroxysms recurring every 40 to 90 minutes. Tachycardia resistant to beta blocker intervention. Renal function declining. GFR dropped to 28. Diaphoresis episodes correlating with hypertensive spikes. I stopped walking. My hand found the wall and I leaned against it, suddenly unsteady. The fluorescent light above me buzzed. My mouth went dry. My heart began to pound in a way that had nothing to do with being somewhere I should not be. I had heard these exact words before. Not in this hospital, not from these doctors. Years ago, in a county hospital on the other side of the city, a younger version of me had stood in a hallway just like this one, listening to a different group of doctors list the same symptoms for a different woman, my wife, my Vanessa. Paroxysmal hypertension, tachycardia, drenching sweats, headaches that made her scream, kidneys failing for no apparent reason, and doctors, good doctors, smart doctors running in circles because pheochromocytoma was the diagnosis nobody thought of until it was too late. Vanessa had died on a Tuesday. I had spent every night for the next couple of years reading everything ever published about the tumor that killed her. Not because I planned to go back to medical school. I had abandoned that dream when Lily needed a full-time father. I read because the knowledge was the only thing that made the grief bearable. If I could understand exactly what had gone wrong, maybe the randomness of it would hurt less. It never hurt less, but the knowledge stayed. Now, standing in the hallway of Lakeside Memorial's VIP wing, I heard the ghost of my wife's illness, speaking through the symptoms of a woman I had never met. And I knew with the certainty of someone who had earned his understanding through the worst kind of tuition exactly what was happening inside that room. I also knew that if I walked away, there was a very good chance Monica Harrington would die the same way Vanessa had. I stood there for a long time. My hands were trembling. Every rational part of my brain told me to turn around, go back to Lily, stay in my lane. I was a maintenance worker, a single dad, A black man standing uninvited in the most expensive wing of a hospital that had never been designed for people like me. But Vanessa's face was right there behind my eyes, and it would not leave. I pushed the door open. The room held 14 people, a fraction of the full 31, the rest monitoring from adjacent rooms or reviewing scans remotely. They all turned. 14 pairs of eyes landed on me. My faded flannel shirt, my worn jeans, my work boots still flecked with paint from a job weeks earlier. I looked like I had wandered in from the maintenance closet, which in a sense I had. Dr. Victor Lang spoke first. Sir, this is a restricted area. Are you lost? I looked at the whiteboards, at the lists of symptoms, at the crossed out diagnoses and the question marks and the arrows pointing nowhere. Then I looked at Dr. Lang. I think I know what she has. Silence, the kind that comes before laughter. It came. A short, incredulous breath from Dr. Becker, a smirk from a resident in the corner. Dr. Lang tilted his head as though I had told a joke in a language he did not quite speak. I appreciate the concern, Lang said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a man accustomed to dismissing people without appearing rude. But we have the situation under control. If you could step outside, security will escort you back to wherever you need to be. You don't have it under control, I said. My voice was quiet, steady. You've been treating her for hours, and she's getting worse. I know what this is because I've seen it before. Lang's warmth evaporated. He nodded to someone near the door. Within moments, a security guard appeared. I felt a hand on my arm. Sir, you need to come with me. I looked back at the whiteboard one last time as I was led out. The numbers stared back at me. The answer was right there, written in symptoms that any third-year medical student would have caught if they had ever watched someone die from it. The door closed behind me, but I was not done. The security guard walked me back to the pediatric ward without a word. At the double door, separating the VIP wing from the rest of the hospital, the guard stopped, pointed down the corridor, and said, "Stay on this side." Then he turned and left. And I stood in the empty hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere behind me, a child was coughing in one of the rooms. Somewhere above me, a woman was dying from a disease I could name, but no one would let me speak. I went back to Lily. She was still asleep, her breathing shallow but steady, the IV drip catching the light from the hallway. I lowered myself into the chair beside her bed and pressed my palms against my eyes. My mind would not stop. The symptoms kept cycling through my head like a song I could not turn off. Paroxysmal hypertension, tachycardia, diaphoresis, the classic triad, all of it pointing to the same answer that had come too late for Vanessa and was running out of time for Monica. Morning came, gray and cold, through the window. Lily woke up groggy but smiling and asked for scrambled eggs. I flagged down a nurse, ordered breakfast for her, and sat on the edge of the cot while she ate. I told her a story about a brave girl who traveled through a magic hospital where all the walls changed color depending on your mood. Lily laughed. It was the best sound in the world. I could not sit still anymore. I told Lily I was going to get coffee and stepped into the corridor. My plan was simple. Find someone, anyone on Monica's medical team who might actually listen. I did not have credentials. I did not have authority. But I had something none of those 31 doctors had, and it was burning a hole through my chest. The first attempt failed before it started. I approached the information desk near the VIP wing entrance and asked to speak with someone on Mrs. Harrington's care team. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect posture and a polite, immovable smile, asked for my name and affiliation. When I said I was a parent from the pediatric ward, her expression shifted into something I recognized immediately. It was the look people gave when they were about to say no while pretending they were saying something else. "I'm sorry, sir. Only authorized personnel and family members are permitted access to patient information. I can direct you to the general inquiry desk if you'd like." I tried again at the nurse's station on the 3rd floor. Same result, different face, same wall. A male nurse looked me up and down, the flannel shirt, the work boots, and asked if I was looking for the facilities department. It was not cruelty. That was the thing I had learned long ago. Most of the time it was not even conscious. People simply looked at me and made a calculation based on what they saw. And what they saw was a black man in cheap clothes who obviously did not belong in the expensive part of the building. The calculation happened in less than a second. The conclusion was always the same. I was walking back toward the pediatric ward, frustration tightening my jaw, when a voice behind me said, "You're the one from last night." I turned. A young woman in a white coat stood a few feet away, a tablet tucked under her arm. She was maybe 30 with dark blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of tired eyes that came from too many overnight shifts. Her badge read, Dr. Jessica Ford, internal medicine resident. "I saw them escort you out of the conference room," she said. Her tone was not hostile, but it was not warm either. It was careful, the voice of someone gathering information before deciding what to do with it. "You told Dr. Lang you knew what was wrong with the Harrington patient." "I do," I said. Dr. Ford studied me. Based on what I told her, the truth. I told her about Vanessa, not dramatically, not looking for sympathy, just the facts laid out the way you lay out a case history. My wife had died years ago from an undiagnosed pheochromocytoma. The symptoms Monica Harrington was presenting were identical, and the labetalol they had started was not just failing. It was actively making things worse by blocking beta receptors without addressing the alpha-mediated vasoconstriction, creating a dangerous cycle of hypertensive surges followed by hypotensive crashes. That was why Monica's kidneys were failing. She was being whipsawed to death, and the medication they chose was accelerating it. When I finished, something had shifted in Dr. Ford's expression. Not pity, not belief, but the recognition that the man standing in front of her was not delusional. He might be wrong, but he was not delusional. She was young enough to know she did not know everything, and old enough to recognize that the 31 experts upstairs had not produced a single working answer in nearly a full day. She was also a resident, the lowest rung on the ladder, which meant that if she brought my theory to the attending physicians and it turned out to be nonsense, her career would take a hit she could not afford. And if she brought it and it turned out to be right, some of those attendings would never forgive her for it. "I cannot just walk you into the conference room," she said. "Lang would have me removed from the case. Then get me to the husband," I said. "He is the one with decision-making authority. If the doctors will not listen, maybe the family will." It took Dr. Ford some time. She made a couple of phone calls and had one quiet conversation in a stairwell with a senior nurse she trusted. Later that morning, I found myself standing in a small waiting room on the 4th floor face to face with Stephen Harrington. Stephen looked like a man who had not slept. His suit jacket was draped over a chair. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were red. Behind him, through a glass partition, I could see the edge of the ICU suite where Monica lay, surrounded by machines. Karen Dawson, Monica's chief of staff, stood beside Stephen with her arms folded. She had agreed to this meeting only because Dr. Ford had framed it carefully. A person with potentially relevant medical insight, nothing more. Karen's expression made it clear she expected this to be a waste of time. Stephen looked at me the way a drowning man looks at a piece of driftwood, not with hope, but with the desperate willingness to grab anything that floats. "They tell me you think you know what's wrong with my wife," Stephen said. His voice was hoarse. "I don't think," I said. "I know your wife has a pheochromocytoma, a tumor on one of her adrenal glands. It produces massive amounts of adrenaline and noradrenaline in unpredictable surges. That is why her blood pressure spikes without warning and then crashes. That is why her heart rate is erratic. That is why she is sweating through the sheets. Headache, tachycardia, diaphoresis. It is the textbook triad, and every single one of her symptoms fits." Stephen shook his head slowly, not in disagreement but in confusion. "If it is that obvious, why haven't 31 doctors figured it out?" "Because it is rare," I said. Most physicians will go their entire career without seeing a single case. And because pheochromocytoma is a mimic, it looks like a cardiac emergency, it looks like a stroke, it looks like sepsis. Every specialist in that room is diagnosing from their own field. The cardiologist sees a heart problem, the neurologist sees a brain problem. Nobody is stepping back to see the whole picture. And there is something else. I kept my voice level. They put her on labetalol, a beta blocker, in a Fecchio crisis. Administering a beta blocker without first establishing alpha blockade can cause a catastrophic rebound in blood pressure. It is called unopposed alpha stimulation. It is in every endocrinology textbook, and it is actively making your wife worse right now. The room was silent. Karen Dawson had uncrossed her arms. Stephen looked at me for a long time. Who are you? Nobody, I said. I am a maintenance worker. I am a single father. My daughter is downstairs with sickle cell disease, and that is the only reason I am in this building. But years ago, my wife died of the same disease your wife has right now. The same symptoms, the same misdiagnosis, the same wrong medications. I watched it happen and I could not stop it. I am telling you right now, you can stop it. But it has to be today. If she goes another stretch on this protocol, her organs will shut down and there will be nothing left to save. Stephen turned to Karen. Karen turned to Dr. Ford, who had been standing by the door. Is any of this possible? Stephen asked. Dr. Ford chose her words with precision. Pheochromocytoma is consistent with the symptom profile. It would explain the treatment resistance, and the concern about beta blocker therapy in an undiagnosed pheo case is well documented in medical literature. I cannot confirm the diagnosis without lab work, specifically plasma metanephrines and catecholamine levels, but the tests can be run quickly. Stephen stood up. The driftwood had become something solid. Get me Dr. Lang, he said, and get those tests ordered now. The confrontation happened in the conference room where I had been laughed out of hours earlier. This time I had been invited. Dr. Ford stood beside me. Stephen Harrington sat at the head of the table. 14 attending physicians lined the walls, and Dr. Victor Lang sat directly across from me with the expression of a man who had been personally insulted. Lang let me speak for a short time before cutting me off. With all due respect to your personal experience, Mr. Lawson, this is not a diagnosis by anecdote. We have imaging, lab work, and the collective expertise of 31 board-certified physicians. We are pursuing autoimmune vasculitis, which is supported by the inflammatory markers. I did not flinch. Her inflammatory markers are elevated because her body has been in a catecholamine storm. That is a secondary response, not a primary cause. You are treating the smoke and ignoring the fire. A murmur went through the room. Dr. Becker, the cardiologist, leaned forward. You mentioned unopposed alpha stimulation from the labetalol. Walk me through that. I did, point by point. I explained how the beta blocker was lowering her heart rate but leaving the alpha receptor-mediated vasoconstriction unchecked, creating a dangerous cycle of hypertensive surges followed by hypotensive crashes. I cited the mechanism. I described the pathophysiology. I spoke the way someone speaks when they have read the same material 1,000 times, not with the polish of a lecturer, but with the bone-deep familiarity of a man who had memorized every word because his wife's life had depended on it. When I finished, 3 of the physicians were no longer smiling. Dr. Becker was writing something down. Dr. Lang was not. This is a waste of time, Lang said flatly. He turned to Stephen. Mr. Harrington, I strongly advise against diverting resources based on the speculation of an unqualified individual. Dr. Ford stepped forward. The plasma metanephrine test is quick. If the results are normal, we have lost nothing. If they are elevated, we have our diagnosis and we may still have time to save her life. The risk of running the test is 0. The risk of not running it. She let the sentence hang. Stephen Harrington looked at Dr. Lang, then at me, then at the glass wall behind which his wife lay dying by degrees. Run the test, Stephen said. Now. The results came back in the early afternoon. Plasma metanephrines were elevated at more than 8 times the upper limit of normal. Free catecholamines were through the roof. The diagnosis was confirmed: pheochromocytoma. I had been right. Every specialist in the room had been wrong. Dr. Lang said nothing. The protocol was changed immediately. Labetalol was discontinued and replaced with phenoxybenzamine, an alpha blocker to be administered before any beta blockade. The endocrinology team, which had been consulted only peripherally until now, took over primary management. For a couple of hours, Monica's vitals held, then everything fell apart. Her blood pressure dropped dangerously low. Her heart rate became erratic, jumping, stalling, jumping again. The monitors began screaming. Nurses rushed in. Dr. Lang pushed past me in the hallway, shouting orders. The alpha blocker had opened the floodgates. Monica's vascular system, constricted for hours by the catecholamine storm, was suddenly relaxing, and her blood volume was not enough to fill the expanded space. She was crashing. Dr. Lang wheeled on me in the corridor, his face white with fury. "This is what happens when you let amateurs practice medicine." She was stable before you intervened. Stephen Harrington appeared in the doorway of the ICU suite. He looked at the monitors, at the doctor scrambling at his wife's body, convulsing under the hands of a crash team. Then he looked at me. His eyes asked the question his mouth could not form. "What have you done?" I stood in the middle of it all. The alarms, the shouting, the accusation in every pair of eyes, and felt the ground beneath me disappear because I had seen this before too. I had watched Vanessa's numbers spiral downward on a screen just like this one. I had stood in a hallway just like this one, powerless, while the woman I loved slipped away. The difference was that this time I knew what came next, and I knew what had to be done if anyone would let me speak. I raised my voice above the alarms. "Do not switch her back." Dr. Lang was already barking orders at the nursing team to restart the labetalol drip. He did not even look at me. 2 nurses were moving toward the IV stand. The crash cart had been wheeled to the bedside. Monica's blood pressure was still falling, and every person in the room was operating on the same instinct. Undo the last thing that was changed. I stepped forward close enough that Lang could not ignore me. "This is not a drug reaction. This is expected. Her vascular system has been clamped down by catecholamines. The alpha blocker is releasing that constriction, and her blood volume is not sufficient to fill the expanded vessels. She needs aggressive fluid resuscitation, normal saline wide open right now. If you put her back on the beta blocker, you will trap her in the same cycle that has been destroying her organs since she arrived. She will die." Lang turned on me with barely contained rage. "You are not a physician. You have no license, no credentials, and no authority in this room. If this woman dies because of your amateur diagnosis, I will personally ensure you face criminal charges. If she dies because you restarted the labetalol, it won't be my diagnosis that killed her. I said it will be your pride." The room went still. Even the nurses had stopped moving, their hands frozen between 2 sets of contradictory orders. The monitors continued their frantic beeping. Monica's heart rate was jumping between 50 and 120, each spike triggering a fresh cascade of alarms. Dr. Jessica Ford stepped into the space between Lang and me. She held her tablet up so both men could see the screen. "Dr. Lang, the literature on phenoxybenzamine initiation in acute pheochromocytoma crisis specifically warns about precipitous hypotension in the first hours. The standard of care is volume expansion, aggressive crystalloid infusion, not discontinuation of alpha blockade. Reverting to beta blocker monotherapy in a confirmed pheo case with catecholamines at 8 times normal would be contraindicated by every major endocrinology guideline published in the last 15 years. She was not raising her voice. She did not need to. Every word landed with the weight of someone who knew she was risking her residency and had decided to risk it anyway. Lang stared at her. His jaw worked. Behind him, Dr. Becker, the cardiologist, was looking at the monitor with an expression that had shifted from panic to something more calculated. He had been writing notes during my presentation that morning. He had not thrown them away. "She is right about the fluid resuscitation," Becker said quietly. "If this is catecholamine-induced vasoconstriction releasing, volume is the answer, not reversal. Stephen Harrington was standing in the doorway. He had watched the entire exchange without moving. His wife's blood pressure read dangerously low on the screen above her bed. The number was dropping. Time was a luxury no one in the room could afford. Stephen looked at me. His voice came out barely above a whisper, rough and cracking at the edges. Your wife. She went through this too. I met his eyes. She did. And the doctors did exactly what Dr. Lang is about to do. They panicked and reversed course. She was dead by morning. Stephen closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was looking at the nurses. Do what he says, Stephen said. Fluids. Keep the current medication. Do it now. Lang opened his mouth to protest. Stephen cut him off with a single look, the look of a man who had nothing left to lose and was done asking permission. The nurses moved. Liters of normal saline went up on a pressure bag, running wide open into Monica's central line. Another bag was spiked and ready. Dr. Ford positioned herself at the bedside monitor, watching every number, her pen tapping against the tablet in a rhythm she did not seem to notice. I stood by the wall. I had done everything I could do. The rest belonged to Monica's body, to the blood flowing through her veins, to the vessels slowly learning to relax after a day of chemical siege, to the kidneys that had been battered but had not yet quit. The minutes stretched. Monica's blood pressure drifted low, dangerously low, but no longer falling. Her heart rate settled, still fast but no longer chaotic. The alarms continued, but the pitch of the room had changed. The frantic energy had given way to something heavier and quieter, the weight of waiting. At the mark, the systolic reading climbed, then higher. Nobody spoke. Her heart rate dropped. The renal output monitor, which had shown almost nothing, registered a small but measurable increase. Dr. Ford looked up from the screen. Her eyes found me across the room. The numbers continued to improve. Her heart rate was steady, regular. The catecholamine storm was not over. It would take days to fully stabilize her, and eventually the tumor would need to be surgically removed, but the crisis had broken. The body was responding. The alpha blocker was doing what it was designed to do, and the fluids were giving her circulatory system the volume it needed to function in its newly relaxed state. Monica Harrington was going to live. Dr. Becker was the first to move. He walked to the whiteboard where hours of wrong diagnosis were still scrolled in red and blue marker, and he quietly erased his own. Dr. Lang left the room without a word. No one called after him. Stephen Harrington sank into the chair beside his wife's bed, took her hand, and pressed it against his forehead. His shoulders shook, but he made no sound. I watched from the doorway for a moment. Then I turned and walked down the corridor, past the nurse's station, past the reception desk where I had been turned away that morning, through the double doors, and back to the pediatric ward where my daughter was waiting. Days later, Monica Harrington opened her eyes. The breathing tube had been removed earlier. Her kidney function was improving. The endocrinology team had mapped the tumor on imaging, a 3-centimeter mass on her left adrenal gland. And surgery was scheduled soon. She was weak. Her voice was a thread, but she was alive and she was lucid. And when Stephen told her the story of what had happened, all of it from the 31 doctors to the man in the flannel shirt, she asked to see me. I came to the VIP suite one afternoon. Lily's crisis had passed and she was being discharged the following morning. I had shaved. I was wearing a clean shirt. I stood at the foot of Monica's bed with my hands at my sides, looking deeply uncomfortable in a room that was not designed for people like me. Monica studied me for a long time. She was a woman who had spent decades reading boardrooms, measuring the worth of every person who walked through her door in the first 5 seconds. She had built an empire on the ability to see what others missed, and she had almost died because the people around her could not see past a flannel shirt and a pair of work boots. Stephen told me everything, she said. Her voice was thin but clear. He told me what you did, and he told me what they almost did not let you do. I nodded. I did not seem to know what to do with my hands. I am told you were a medical student once, Monica said. A long time ago, I said, and you left because your wife died. I left because my daughter needed a father more than the world needed another doctor. Monica looked at me the way she had spent a career looking at problems, not with sentiment, but with precision. Then her expression softened into something I had not expected. It was not gratitude exactly. It was recognition. The recognition of one person seeing another fully for the first time. Thank you, she said. 2 words. No cameras, no press release, no grand gesture. Just a woman in a hospital bed alive because a man she never would have noticed in any other context had refused to be silent. I nodded once. I hope your recovery goes well, ma'am. Then I left the room and I did not look back. The next morning I signed Lily's discharge papers at the pediatric nurses station. Betty, the nurse who had been with us since the first night, handed Lily a lollipop and told her to stay out of trouble. Lily promised she would, which both of them knew was a lie. In the elevator going down, Lily tugged on my sleeve. Daddy, where did you keep going when I was sleeping? You kept leaving. I looked down at my daughter. She had her mother's eyes, wide brown, missing nothing. I went to help somebody, I said. Somebody who was very sick. Like me, Lily asked. Different kind of sick, but yeah, like you. Lily thought about this. Did you fix them? I smiled. It was the kind of smile that held more than one thing at once. Relief, exhaustion, grief, and something that might have been the beginning of peace. I think so, baby. I think so. Lily reached up and took my hand, and we walked out of Lakeside Memorial Hospital into the gray morning light. Weeks later, Dr. Jessica Ford opened her email at the start of a night shift and found a message with the subject line, Proposal, Diagnostic Failure in Pheochromocytoma, a case for systematic screening reform. The sender was Derek Lawson. The proposal was pages long, meticulously researched, and cited dozens of peer-reviewed sources. It outlined a framework for improving pheochromocytoma detection rates in emergency and critical care settings, with a particular focus on cases where the initial presentation mimicked more common conditions. It was not the work of a doctor. It was the work of a man who had lost someone and decided that the losing would mean something. Dr. Ford read it twice. Then she forwarded it to the hospital's research committee with a single line added at the top. This deserves to be heard. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications because stories like this remind us that the right voice at the right time can save a life. See you in the next one. I stood there in the hallway of Lakeside Memorial that gray Chicago morning, watching Lily's little hand slip into mine as we walked out into the daylight, and something inside me finally cracked open. All those years of carrying Vanessa's death like a stone in my chest, the nights I stayed up reading every medical journal I could find, the way her symptoms haunted me long after the county hospital doctors had given up hadn't been wasted. That pain had turned into the one thing that saved Monica Harrington's life when 31 of the country's best doctors couldn't. I learned then that the most powerful knowledge doesn't always come from fancy degrees or white coats. It comes from the kind of heartbreak that forces you to pay attention, to remember every detail, because forgetting would mean losing her all over again. I learned that you never, ever judge the person standing in front of you by the wrinkles in their flannel shirt or the paint on their work boots. I was just a single dad from maintenance, a black man who didn't belong in that VIP wing, but my voice was the only one that knew the truth. And the real miracle wasn't just that Monica lived. It was realizing that my greatest loss had become someone else's second chance. Life has a way of turning our deepest wounds into the exact medicine someone else needs if we're brave enough to speak up even when the whole room laughs. That's the lesson that still brings tears to my eyes every time I think about it. Your story, no matter how ordinary or painful, might be the one thing that saves a life today. So tell me, where are you watching from right now? drop your city or state in the comments. I read every single one. And if this hit you in the heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss the next story that might change everything. See you soon, friends.